They say you never truly know someone until you fight them. I thought I understood warfare, having conquered 17 star systems and enslaved 43 species across the galaxy. My claws had torn through the finest warriors of a dozen civilizations. My fleet had reduced entire worlds to ash and memory. But humans were different. When our invasion ships first arrived at their blue marble of a planet, we expected another easy conquest. The intelligence reports painted them as a young species, barely 1,000 years past their primitive tribal phase, still bound to a single world. No energy shields, no plasma weaponry, no faster-than-light travel. They were children playing with chemical rockets and metal projectiles. We were so very, very wrong. What I discovered when I fought humanity wasn't their strength, their technology, or their numbers. It was something far more terrifying, something that still haunts my dreams and makes my warrior's heart tremble in the darkness of space. Something that transformed me from a conqueror into a survivor, from a predator into prey. This is the story of how I learned that in the vast coldness of the universe, there exists no force more dangerous than a human being who has absolutely nothing left to lose. And why, even now, as the most feared admiral in the Zephyrian Empire, I wake up screaming their battle cry, "Remember Earth." Admiral Kethvar stood on the command bridge of his flagship, the Crimson Talon, watching the blue planet grow larger in the view screen. His reptilian features, marked by the ritual scars of 17 conquered worlds, reflected the cold light of distant stars. The planet below looked peaceful, almost serene, with its swirling white clouds and vast blue oceans. It reminded him of Selvathia Prime before he had burned its forests to feed his war machine. Initial scans complete, Admiral reported as tactical officer, Subcommander Vexenai. Her voice carried the typical confidence of the Zephyrian military elite. The humans appear to have primitive satellite networks and basic space stations. No energy signatures matching known defensive technologies. Their largest settlements contain approximately 8 to 12 million individuals each. Kethvar's forked tongue flicked out, tasting the recycled air of the bridge. The taste of victory was already on it. What are their military capabilities? Laughable, sir. They still use chemical propulsion for their spacecraft and kinetic projectiles for warfare. No plasma weaponry detected. No energy shields. Their most advanced vessels appear to be constructed of refined metals and basic composite materials. Vexenai paused, consulting her datapad. Intelligence estimates their entire planet could be subdued within 7 planetary rotations using standard invasion protocols. The Admiral's black eyes gleamed with satisfaction. 17 worlds had fallen before his tactical genius, each one adding to the glory of the Zephyrian Empire and to his own legend. The humans would be number 18, and perhaps the easiest conquest yet. He had fought species that could manipulate gravity, others that could phase through solid matter, and even those that had achieved basic telepathic communication. Compared to such adversaries, these humans seemed almost pitifully vulnerable. What is their population distribution? Kethvar asked, his claws clicking against the command console as he planned his strategy. Approximately 8 billion individuals spread across 7 major landmasses. They appear to be divided into numerous political entities, many of which are in constant conflict with one another. Our xenobiological analysis suggests they're a highly aggressive species, but their aggression is directed primarily toward their own kind rather than external threats. This information pleased Kethvar greatly. Divided species were always easier to conquer. The Zephyrian Empire had built its expansion on exploiting such divisions. turning subject races against each other before sweeping in to claim the spoils. His strategic mind was already formulating the approach. Identify the major power centers, eliminate the strongest factions first, then use the chaos to turn the remaining groups against each other. Sir, interrupted communications officer Draxmole, we are receiving transmissions from the planet's surface. Multiple frequencies, thousands of separate broadcast sources. Put them through the translation matrix, Kethvar ordered. Let us hear what these humans have to say. The bridge speakers crackled to life with a cacophony of alien sounds. The translation systems worked frantically to decode the babble of human languages, and, slowly, words began to emerge from the chaos. Breaking news from the United Nations Emergency Assembly. Unidentified vessels detected at the edge of our solar system. Military commanders worldwide have been placed on high alert. Is his first contact with alien intelligence. Kethvar listened with growing amusement. The humans were aware of their arrival, but their transmissions revealed confusion, fear, and the familiar sound of species unprepared for what was coming. Some voices called for peace and communication, others demanded immediate military action. The cacophony reminded him of the final days of the methane worlds, where the inhabitants had similarly broadcast their panic to the stars as his fleet approached. Admiral, Vex and I spoke up. Long-range scanners are detecting movement around their largest satellite. It appears to be some kind of space station. The view screen shifted to focus on the structure orbiting Earth. It was a modest construction of metal modules and solar arrays, clearly designed for scientific research rather than military purposes. Kethvar could see small vessels docking with it, likely evacuating personnel in anticipation of what was to come. Pitiful, he muttered. They scatter like prey animals at the first sign of a predator. But as he studied the space station more closely, something caught his attention. The humans weren't just evacuating. They were also moving supplies and equipment, and their small vessels seemed to be taking positions around their planet in what looked almost like a defensive formation. It was a futile gesture, of course, but it showed a level of coordination that was somewhat impressive for such a primitive species. Sir, we are receiving a directed transmission from the planet's surface, Draxmole reported. Single source, high-power transmission array. They are attempting to communicate directly with us. How delightfully naive, Kethvar chuckled. Put it through. The static cleared, and a human voice emerged, speaking in a language the translation systems had identified as English. It was a male voice, steady despite obvious underlying tension. This is Secretary General Chun of the United Nations, speaking on behalf of humanity. We have detected your vessels and wish to open peaceful communication. We welcome you to our solar system and hope that we can establish mutually beneficial relations between our species. The Admiral's laugh echoed through the bridge, joined by the amused hisses of his crew. The same words, the same hopeful tone, the same pathetic attempt at diplomacy. He had heard virtually identical pleas from the crystalline hegemony, the void swimmers, and the singing forests of Nethari 9. It never ended any differently. Open a channel, Kethvar commanded. Let us introduce ourselves properly to these humans. The transmission array activated, and Kethvar's image was broadcast toward the blue planet. He made sure to display his full military regalia, the skull decorations of conquered enemies, and the ceremonial weapons that had drunk the blood of 1,000 defeated warriors. Humans of Earth, he began, his voice carrying the authority of 17 victories. I am Admiral Kethvar of the Zephyrian Empire, commander of the 9th Conquest Fleet. Your planet has been designated for imperial expansion. You have one standard galactic period to surrender unconditionally. Any resistance will result in the complete extermination of your species. He cut the transmission and turned back to his tactical displays. The standard formula had never failed him. Most species chose immediate surrender when faced with his reputation and the obvious superiority of his forces. Those foolish enough to resist typically fell within days of the initial assault. Admiral, Vex and I called out, "We are receiving response transmissions from multiple points across the planet." "More pleas for mercy?" "No doubt," Kethvar said dismissively. "Let them waste their breath." But as the human responses came through the translation systems, Kethvar's confidence began to waver slightly. Instead of the expected begging and negotiation attempts, the humans were transmitting something quite different. "This is General Martinez of the United States Space Command. Your terms are rejected. Earth will defend itself. President Volkov of the Russian Federation to the alien fleet. We have survived Napoleon, Hitler, and Stalin. We are not afraid of you. Prime Minister Tanaka speaking for the Pacific Alliance. Our ancestors faced the Mongol invasions and endured. We will endure again. Chancellor Weber for the European Federation. Humanity does not kneel to tyrants, whether they come from Earth or from the stars." The transmissions continued, each one a rejection of his ultimatum. Kethvar found himself increasingly puzzled. This was not the typical response pattern. Usually by this point, the planetary government would be frantically attempting to negotiate terms of surrender or begging for more time to consider their options. "Sir," Draxmol reported with obvious confusion, "they are not attempting to surrender. Instead, their military communications traffic has increased by 3,000%. They appear to be mobilizing for war." Kethvar studied the tactical displays showing Earth's surface. Heat signatures were indeed increasing around what appeared to be military installations. Their primitive spacecraft were taking positions throughout their orbital space, and energy readings suggested they were powering up every weapon system they possessed. "Foolish," he concluded. "They choose to die with weapons in their hands rather than live as subjects of the Empire. Very well, we shall grant them their wish for a warrior's death." He turned to his fleet coordination officer. "Signal all vessels. Begin the preliminary bombardment. Target their satellite networks and space installations first. I want them blind and isolated before we begin the surface assault." "Yes, Admiral," came the prompt reply. The Crimson Talon and its accompanying vessels moved into attack formation. Kethvar watched with professional satisfaction as his fleet deployed according to the tactical doctrine that had served him so well across 17 conquests. Destroyer escorts took the outer perimeter to prevent any escape attempts, while the heavy cruisers positioned themselves for orbital bombardment. His flagship, equipped with planet-cracking weaponry, remained at the center of the formation like a spider in its web. "Admiral, the humans are launching vessels," Vex and I reported. Multiple small craft rising from the planet's surface and deploying from their space station. Kethvar observed the human response with interest. Their ships were indeed primitive, constructed of metal and using chemical propulsion, but they showed no hesitation in rising to meet his vastly superior force. He counted approximately 300 human vessels of various sizes, from tiny single-pilot fighters to larger ships that might carry a crew of 20 or 30. Brave but futile, he mused. Their largest weapons will be unable to penetrate even our lightest shields. Still, their courage is admirable. When this is over, I shall have their military leaders preserved as specimens of warrior spirit. The human fleet spread out in what appeared to be a defensive formation around their planet. Ketvar noted that while their tactics showed some sophistication, their technology remained laughably inadequate. Their weapons appeared to be kinetic projectiles and primitive explosive missiles, the kind of armaments that might have been dangerous to his forces perhaps 500 years ago. "Begin the attack," he commanded. "Let them see the futility of resistance against the Empire." The Zephyrian fleet opened fire with disciplined precision. Energy beams lanced across space, targeting the human space station first. But as Ketvar watched, something unexpected happened. The space station didn't simply explode or collapse as he had anticipated. Instead, it seemed to split apart in a controlled manner, its sections spreading out to avoid the concentrated fire, while smaller human ships swarmed around it like angry insects. Interesting, he admitted. They sacrificed their primary installation to preserve their mobile forces. Crude but tactically sound, the human ships began their attack run, closing distance with his fleet despite the obvious disadvantage. Ketvar had to respect their courage, even as he prepared to annihilate them. But as the human vessels came within range and opened fire, he experienced something that had not happened in his 17 previous conquests. His ships began taking damage. Not critical damage, not yet, but actual measurable impacts on his shields and hull plating. The human weapons, while primitive, were being used with a precision and intensity that was frankly shocking. Instead of the wild, panicked firing he expected from an outmatched force, the humans were coordinating their attacks, concentrating fire on single targets, and using their superior numbers to overwhelm his defenses through sheer volume of fire. "Report," he snapped to his tactical officer. "Shields holding at 78% on the outer escorts," Vexenai replied, her voice tight with surprise. "The humans are using mass driver projectiles at extremely high velocities, supplemented by nuclear fission explosives. Individual shots are weak, but they are achieving remarkable hit rates and focusing their fire very effectively." One of his destroyer escorts shuddered under concentrated human fire, its shields flickering. Ketvar watched with growing unease as the humans demonstrated tactical coordination that should have been impossible for a species that had never faced interstellar warfare. "How are they achieving such accuracy?" he demanded. "Unknown, sir. Their targeting systems appear to be more sophisticated than our initial scan suggested. They may be using some form of quantum computation or distributed processing network." As the space battle continued, Ketvar began to realize that his intelligence reports had been catastrophically inadequate. The humans were not the primitive, disorganized rabble he had expected. They were a species that had apparently spent their entire existence at war with each other, and they had learned their lessons well. But despite their surprising competence, they were still hopelessly outmatched. His fleet's superior technology and firepower was beginning to tell, and the human ships were being systematically destroyed despite their valiant efforts. Within 6 hours, only scattered remnants of the human space force remained, retreating toward their planet to make what would undoubtedly be a final, futile stand. "Sir," Communications Officer Draxmole spoke up suddenly, "we are receiving another transmission from the planet's surface." Ketvar was beginning to tire of human communications, but his curiosity remained strong. "Put it through." This time, the voice was different. Younger, female, but carrying an intensity that made Ketvar's scales prickle with unexpected unease. "This is Commander Sarah Chun of the Earth Defense Force. We've watched you destroy our space fleet. We've seen the power of your weapons. You think we're beaten, that we'll surrender now that you've shown us how outmatched we are." The Admiral waited for the inevitable plea for mercy or terms of surrender. Instead, the human continued, "You don't understand us at all, do you? You don't understand what you've just done. You haven't defeated us. You just taught us what we need to know to kill you." The transmission ended, leaving an uncomfortable silence on the bridge. Kethvar found himself staring at the blue planet below, and for the first time in 17 conquests, he felt something he had nearly forgotten: uncertainty. What exactly had he gotten himself into? The orbital bombardment began at dawn on what the humans call their Pacific coast. Admiral Kethvar had ordered a measured assault, targeting major population centers and military installations with enough force to demonstrate the futility of resistance without completely destroying the planet's infrastructure. After all, a dead world was worth nothing to the Empire. The first energy beams struck the human city they called Los Angeles, carving great furrows through its sprawling urban landscape. Kethvar watched from his command bridge as buildings collapsed and fires spread across the metropolitan area. He expected to see the familiar signs of a civilization beginning to crumble: mass panic, complete breakdown of communication networks, and the rapid emergence of surrender signals from the surviving government. Instead, something remarkable happened. Within minutes of the bombardment beginning, the humans began to respond in ways that defied everything Kethvar knew about conquest dynamics. "Sir," reported Vexenai, her voice strained with disbelief, "the humans are maintaining organized communications during the attack. Their military networks are not collapsing as projected." Kethvar studied the tactical displays. The human communication networks were indeed still functioning, but not in their original configuration. Instead of relying on the centralized systems that his forces had targeted, they appear to have switched to a distributed network that was far more difficult to disrupt. Every destroyed communication hub was immediately replaced by dozens of smaller nodes, creating a web of information that seemed to grow stronger under attack rather than weaker. Furthermore, Vexenai continued, "They are broadcasting detailed tactical information about our attack patterns to their other military centers. They're learning our capabilities in real time and transmitting that data globally." This was unprecedented. In Kethvar's experience, species under orbital bombardment typically suffered complete communications breakdown within hours. The humans were not only maintaining their networks, but actually using the attack itself as a source of intelligence. "Continue the bombardment," he ordered, but with less certainty than before. "Expand the target list to include secondary population centers. Perhaps they need a more dramatic demonstration." The Zephyrian fleet extended its assault to human cities across the globe. Each strike was precisely calculated to cause maximum psychological impact, while preserving the basic infrastructure that would be valuable to the Empire. But as the bombardment continued, Kethvar began to notice disturbing patterns in the human response. The humans were not just enduring the attacks. They were adapting to them. After the first few hours, the humans began implementing tactics that Kethvar had never encountered. Instead of keeping their military forces concentrated in large, obvious bases where they could be easily targeted, they dispersed into small, mobile units that were nearly impossible to track from orbit. Their industrial capacity, rather than shutting down under attack, actually seemed to be increasing as they shifted to what their communications described as wartime production protocols. Most disturbing of all, their resistance was not decreasing as casualties mounted. If anything, it was becoming more determined and better organized. "Admiral," called out Subcommander Drexko from the intelligence station, "you need to see this. We have intercepted human news broadcasts from their surviving media networks." The main view screen switched to display intercepted human transmissions. Kethvar watched with growing unease as human reporters, speaking from bunkers and mobile broadcast units, delivered their reports not with the despair he expected, but with what could only be described as grim determination. This is Rebecca Martinez reporting from New York City. The alien bombardment continues, but civilian evacuation procedures are proceeding according to plan. Military command reports that our forces have successfully analyzed the energy signatures of the alien weapons and are developing countermeasures. The broadcast switched to another reporter. James Wilson here from what remains of the London defense sector. While the aliens possess superior technology, our military analysts have identified several potential vulnerabilities in their attack patterns. More importantly, we have confirmation that their weapons, while devastating, are not unlimited in their capacity. Kethvar felt a chill run down his spine. The humans were treating his overwhelming assault as a learning experience, analyzing his forces even as they died under his guns. This was not the behavior of a defeated species. This was the behavior of a species that intended to fight back. "Sir," Vex and I interrupted his thoughts. "We have a problem. Long-range sensors are detecting movement in the asteroid belt beyond the humans' red planet. Multiple objects are changing trajectory and beginning to accelerate toward our position." The Admiral turned his attention to the tactical display showing the outer system. Sure enough, several dozen objects that had been identified as natural asteroids were now showing energy signatures and acceleration patterns that clearly mark them as artificial constructs. "How is this possible?" he demanded. "Our intelligence indicated that the humans were limited to their single planet and primitive space station." "Unknown, sir. These installations were apparently hidden among the natural asteroids, possibly for decades. They appear to be some form of automated defensive platforms, now activating in response to our attack on their homeworld." Kethvar studied the approaching objects. They were too distant to pose an immediate threat, but their very existence suggested that human space capabilities had been significantly underestimated. If they had been maintaining hidden installations throughout their system for years, what else had his intelligence services missed? "Time to reach our position?" he asked. "At current acceleration, approximately 18 standard hours, sir." That gave him time to complete the conquest of Earth before dealing with whatever surprises the humans had prepared in their outer system. But the existence of these hidden installations meant that the humans had been planning for interstellar conflict long before his arrival. The implications of this were deeply disturbing. As if to punctuate his growing unease, Communications Officer Draxmole spoke up again. "Admiral, we are receiving what appears to be a general broadcast from the planet's surface. All human communication networks are carrying the same signal simultaneously." "Put it through," Kethvar ordered, though he was beginning to dread what he might hear. The voice that emerged from the speakers was different from the earlier communications. It belonged to an older human male, speaking with an authority that suggested high military rank. But more importantly, it carried an undertone of something that Kethvar was starting to recognize in human communications, a complete absence of fear. "This is General Harrison, speaking for the United Earth Defense Command. We know you can hear us, so listen carefully. You have spent the last 12 hours demonstrating your superior firepower. You have shown us exactly how your weapons work, their rate of fire, their energy output, and their tactical limitations." Kethvar felt his claws dig into the armrests of his command chair. "You have also shown us something else," the human general continued. "You have shown us that you can be hurt. Your shields fluctuate when overloaded. Your ships have optimal firing angles. And, most importantly, you follow predictable tactical patterns." The transmission paused, and when it resumed, there was something in the human's voice that made Kethvar's warrior instincts scream warning signals. "We are humans. For our entire history, we have specialized in killing things that are bigger, stronger, and more dangerous than we are. We killed creatures 10 times our size with sharpened sticks. We killed each other with such efficiency that we nearly drove ourselves extinct multiple times. And now we are going to kill you. Furthermore, the voice continued, you have made a critical error in your understanding of our species. You seem to believe that causing us pain will make us surrender. This suggests you have never encountered a species like ours before. Pain doesn't make us surrender. Pain makes us angry. And an angry human is the most dangerous creature in the galaxy. The transmission ended, leaving the bridge in an uncomfortable silence. Kethvar found himself staring at the blue planet below, wondering if he had made a serious miscalculation. His doubts were answered 6 hours later when the first human counterattack began. It started with what appeared to be a routine supply convoy rising from the planet's surface. Kethvar initially ignored the small cluster of human vessels, assuming they were either evacuation ships or perhaps a desperate attempt to establish communication. His attention was focused on the approaching asteroid platforms and the continuing bombardment of surface targets. The human ships approached his outer defense perimeter in what seemed like a standard surrender formation, broadcasting signals that the translation matrix interpreted as requests for safe passage. It was only when they were within close range that Kethvar realized his mistake. The human ships were not supply vessels or evacuation craft. They were weapons. The explosions began simultaneously across his outer defense line as the human ships detonated with a force that defied every calculation his sensors had made about their capabilities. The blasts were not the chemical explosives he expected, but something far more sophisticated. Focused nuclear fusion reactions that channeled their energy directly into his ship's shield matrices. Report. Kethvar roared as his bridge shook from sympathetic vibrations. 7 escort vessels destroyed? Admiral. Vexenai replied, her voice shaking with shock. The human ships were carrying some form of enhanced nuclear device. The explosions were designed specifically to overload our shield harmonics. How could they possibly know our shield frequencies? Unknown, sir, but the targeting was precise. They must have been analyzing our defensive systems throughout the bombardment. Before Kethvar could respond, the second wave of human attacks began. This time, they came from the planet's surface. Massive projectiles launched by what appeared to be electromagnetic rail systems. The projectiles were traveling at nearly 10% of light speed, moving far too fast for his point defense systems to track effectively. The first projectile punched through the shields of a heavy cruiser and tore completely through its hull, venting atmosphere and crew into the vacuum of space. The second struck his flagship's port shield array, causing fluctuations that sent warning signals screaming across the bridge. These projectiles, Vexenai reported with obvious bewilderment. They appear to be constructed from materials we have never encountered. Our sensors cannot properly analyze their composition, but their mass and velocity are creating kinetic impacts equivalent to our own heavy plasma cannons. Kethvar realized with growing alarm that the humans had been using the bombardment not just to learn about his weapons, but to test his defenses. Every shot they had endured, every beam they had absorbed had been carefully studied and analyzed. Now, they were applying that knowledge in ways that seemed almost impossible for such a primitive species. Sir, Draxmol called out urgently. The asteroid platforms have accelerated beyond our projected timeline. They will reach effective weapons range in 4 hours, not 18. What? Kethvar spun toward the long-range display. The objects from the asteroid belt were indeed approaching much faster than anticipated, and as they drew closer, his sensors were revealing details that filled him with dread. The platforms were not just automated defense systems. They were massive installations, each one larger than his flagship, bristling with weapons that appeared to combine human engineering with principles of physics that his scientists barely understood. Worse still, they were not traveling alone. Each platform was accompanied by clouds of smaller objects that defied easy categorization. Admiral Vexenai's voice was tight with barely controlled fear. Preliminary analysis suggests that each platform is carrying approximately 1,000 smaller attack units. Furthermore, they appear to be using some form of reactionless drive system that our physics models cannot explain. Kethvar stared at the tactical display, feeling the foundations of his confidence crumbling. The humans had not just hidden defensive installations in their outer system. They had been developing technology that surpassed his own in ways he was only beginning to comprehend. As if summoned by his growing despair, another transmission arrived from the planet's surface. This time, the voice was that of the female commander who had spoken after the destruction of the human space fleet. "Admiral Kethvar," she said, and the fact that she knew his name sent a chill through his scaled hide. "You're probably wondering how we know so much about you and your forces. The answer is simple. We have been preparing for this day since we first detected your empire's expansion into this galactic region. You see," she continued, "humans have a saying, hope for the best, but prepare for the worst. We hoped that when we finally encountered other intelligent species, they would come in peace. But we prepared for the possibility that they would come as conquerors." Kethvar found himself hanging on every word, desperate to understand how his perfect conquest had gone so catastrophically wrong. For the past 50 years, our best scientists and engineers have been working on what we call the Prometheus Project, the development of defensive technologies based on theoretical capabilities that an advanced hostile species might possess. We have been planning for this war since before you even knew we existed. Every weapon system you have used against us today has been anticipated and countered. Every tactical doctrine you have employed has been studied and prepared for. You are not fighting humanity at its strongest, Admiral. You are fighting humanity at its most prepared. The transmission paused, and when it resumed, there was something in the human's voice that made Kethvar's blood run cold. "But now the real terror begins, because you have just taught us something we could never have learned through theoretical preparation. You have taught us exactly what we are fighting against. And now we're going to teach you why every species in this galaxy should fear the wrath of Earth." As the transmission ended and the asteroid platforms closed to weapons range, Admiral Kethvar realized that he was no longer conducting a conquest. He was fighting for his life against a species that had turned preparation into an art form and warfare into a science that surpassed his own understanding. The humans had been right about one thing. He was about to discover a terror beyond imagination, and that terror was humanity itself. The asteroid platforms opened fire with a precision that defied everything Admiral Kethvar understood about orbital mechanics and weapons targeting. Each massive installation had somehow achieved perfect positioning despite traveling through space at impossible speeds, and their weapon systems operated with a coordination that suggested a level of artificial intelligence far beyond what his empire had achieved. The first salvo destroyed 3 of his heavy cruisers before his shields could even register the incoming fire. The weapons were not energy beams or plasma cannons as he expected, but something far more exotic. Streams of matter that seemed to ignore conventional physics, passing through his shields as if they were not there and converting his ship's hull material directly into energy. "Shield status report," Kethvar barked, watching his fleet's defensive formations crumble under the impossible assault. "Shields are ineffective, sir. Vexenai replied, her voice hollow with disbelief. The human weapons appear to operate on principles that bypass our defensive matrix entirely. They're not striking our shields so much as ignoring them completely. On the tactical display, Kethvar watched his supposedly invincible fleet being systematically dismantled by weapons technology that should not have existed on a planet that had only recently achieved basic spaceflight. Each human platform was engaging multiple Zephyrian ships simultaneously, and every shot was finding its target with lethal accuracy. But the platforms were only the beginning of his nightmare. As the main assault continued, the clouds of smaller objects that accompanied each platform began to resolve into individual units, and what Kethvar saw filled him with a terror he had never experienced in 17 previous conquests. They were not ships or drones as he had assumed. They were humans. Thousands of individual humans, each one encased in some form of powered armor that allowed them to survive in the vacuum of space and move with impossible speed and agility. They were crossing the space between the platforms, and his ships like a swarm of metallic insects, their armor gleaming in the light of the local star. "What are those?" he demanded, pointing at the swarm of approaching figures. Draxmol worked frantically at his communications console, attempting to scan the approaching humans. "Sir, they appear to be individual soldiers in some form of personal spacecraft. But the energy readings are impossible. Each suit is generating power equivalent to one of our fighter craft." Individual soldiers? Kethvar could barely comprehend what he was seeing. They're sending infantry into space combat. His disbelief turned to horror as the first wave of human soldiers reached his outer ships. Instead of attempting to dock or breach the hulls as he expected, they simply pressed their armored hands against his ship's hulls and began to cut through them with tools that seemed to dissolve metal at the molecular level. "Sir, the humans are boarding the destroyer Venom's edge," reported his tactical officer. "They appear to be cutting directly through the hull plating." Kethvar watched the tactical display as dozens of red dots representing human soldiers penetrated the hull of one of his ships. He expected to see the familiar pattern of ship-to-ship boarding action, a gradual advance through corridors, engagement with security forces, and eventual capture of critical systems. Instead, the red dots moved through his ship with impossible speed, and within minutes, the destroyer's power systems went offline. Then its life support. Then its communications. The ship went dark and began to drift, its crew of 300 Zephyrian warriors somehow neutralized by a boarding party of perhaps 50 humans. "How?" Kethvar whispered, staring at the dead ship. His answer came in the form of a transmission from the destroyer itself, but the voice that emerged was not Zephyrian. It was human, speaking in accented English that the translation systems converted to his native tongue. "This is Sergeant Rodriguez of the 47th Orbital Assault Battalion. We have taken control of your vessel. Your crew has been secured and will be treated according to the Geneva Convention. Please note that we have accessed your ship's communication systems and databanks. We now have detailed technical specifications for your entire fleet." Before Kethvar could respond, the pattern repeated across his formation. Human soldiers were boarding his ships faster than his sensors could track, and each vessel they touched went dark within minutes. But rather than destroying his ships, the humans seemed to be capturing them intact, along with all their technology and information. "Admiral," Vexenai's voice was strained to the breaking point. "We need to withdraw. We're losing ships faster than we can target the human forces. Our weapons are ineffective against their armor, and their boarding capabilities are beyond anything in our tactical database." Kethvar found himself paralyzed by indecision. In 17 conquests, he had never faced anything like this. The humans were not just fighting him. They were systematically capturing his fleet and turning his own technology against him. Each ship they took provided them with more information about his capabilities, more weapons to use against his remaining forces, and more evidence of just how catastrophically his intelligence services had failed him. "Sir," Draxmol called out urgently, "we are receiving another general transmission from the planet's surface. All human networks are carrying the same signal." "Put it through," Kethvar ordered, though he was beginning to dread what new horror the humans might reveal. The voice that emerged was different again, belonging to what sounded like an older human female with the authoritative tone of high command. "This is President Sarah Chun of the United Earth Government. Admiral Kethvar, your fleet is being systematically dismantled by forces that represent less than 1% of our total defensive capability. We are offering you one opportunity to surrender your remaining ships and prevent further loss of life." Kethvar's claws dug deep gouges in his command chair. Surrender? To a species he had been preparing to enslave? The very concept was so alien to his warrior culture that he could barely process it. "You seem confused by our offer," the human president continued, as if reading his thoughts. "Allow me to clarify your situation. You arrived at our world with 47 ships and approximately 15,000 personnel. In the last 6 hours, we have captured or destroyed 31 of your vessels and secured nearly 11,000 of your crew members." The numbers struck Kethvar like physical blows. His flagship's computers confirmed the devastating tally. His fleet had been reduced to 16 ships, most of which were damaged and running low on ammunition. "Furthermore," President Chun continued, "our analysis of your captured vessels has provided us with complete technical specifications for your remaining ships, detailed maps of your fleet formations, and access to your communication networks. We know the names, ranks, and personal histories of every officer under your command. We know your tactical preferences, your psychological profile, and your complete military record spanning 17 conquered worlds." Kethvar felt his scales turning pale with shock. How could they possibly have extracted so much information so quickly? But most importantly, the human president's voice took on a tone that made his warrior instinct scream warnings. "We now know the location of your home world and the technical capabilities of your empire. We know about your supply lines, your military doctrine, and the locations of your major fleet bases." The implications hit him like a plasma burst to the chest. If the humans had somehow extracted navigational data from his captured ships, they would know how to find not just his homeworld, but every major Zephyr installation in this sector of the galaxy. "You invaded our world believing us to be primitive and helpless," President Chun continued. "This was a fundamental misunderstanding of human nature. We are a species that has spent our entire evolutionary history as persistence hunters. We do not give up. We do not surrender. And we never, ever forget a threat to our children. Your empire has just declared war on a species that views warfare not as conquest, but as a form of problem solving. And, Admiral Kethvar, we are very good at solving problems." The transmission paused, and when it resumed, there was something in the human leader's voice that made Kethvar's blood run cold. "We are not interested in enslaving your people or conquering your worlds. We have no desire for empire. But you have attacked our families, destroyed our cities, and killed our children. This means that your empire now represents a problem that must be solved permanently. We hereby declare our intention to dismantle the Zephyrian Empire completely. Every military installation, every fleet base, every conquered world will be liberated. Your species will be given the opportunity to live in peace, but your civilization's capacity for interstellar aggression will be eliminated. Kethvar realized with growing horror that the humans were not just defending themselves. They were planning to take the war to his homeworld and beyond. A species that had been confined to a single planet was somehow preparing to challenge an empire that spanned dozens of star systems. To accomplish this goal, President Chun continued, "We will be implementing what our military strategists call the Ragnarok Protocol. This involves the deployment of self-replicating automated systems throughout your territory, designed to systematically neutralize your military capabilities while minimizing civilian casualties." Self-replicating systems? Kethvar's tactical mind reeled at the implications. If the humans possessed technology that could reproduce itself while spreading across interstellar distances, they could potentially overwhelm any defensive force through sheer numbers. "These systems are already in production," the human president announced, as if reading his thoughts. "Our asteroid installations have been manufacturing them for the past 6 hours using materials harvested from your captured vessels. The first wave will be deployed within 12 standard hours." On his tactical display, Kethvar could see that the asteroid platforms were indeed showing increased activity. Massive construction bays had opened across their surfaces, and streams of smaller objects were being launched toward various points in the solar system. The humans were not just building weapons. They were building weapons that could build more weapons. "Admiral Kethvar," President Chin's voice refocused his attention, "you have one final opportunity to prevent this escalation. Surrender your remaining ships and provide complete intelligence on your empire's defensive positions. In return, we will ensure that the liberation of your conquered worlds proceeds with minimal bloodshed. If you refuse, then you will bear responsibility for every death that occurs when humanity brings this war to your doorstep. And I want you to understand something very clearly. When humans fight to protect their children, we do not stop fighting until the threat is eliminated completely." The transmission ended, leaving Kethvar alone with the weight of an impossible decision. Around him, his bridge crew waited for orders that he could not give. His fleet was broken, his intelligence had been catastrophically wrong, and he was facing an enemy that defied every assumption his civilization had made about the nature of warfare and conquest. But perhaps most terrifying of all, he was beginning to understand that the humans were not bluffing. They possessed both the technological capability and the psychological determination to carry out their threats. They had demonstrated that they could capture his ships, extract his secrets, and turn his own technology against him. Now they were promising to take that same relentless efficiency and apply it to the systematic destruction of his entire civilization. As warning alarms began to sound throughout his flagship, and reports came in of more human boarding parties approaching his remaining vessels, Admiral Kethvar faced the first real decision of his military career: surrender to an enemy he had come to exterminate, or fight to the end against a force that was proving far more terrifying than anything he had encountered in 17 successful conquests. Either way, he was beginning to understand that his invasion of Earth had awakened something that should have been left sleeping. The humans had not just defended themselves. They had revealed capabilities that would reshape the balance of power in this entire region of the galaxy. And they were just getting started. Admiral Kethvar chose to fight. It was not a rational decision based on tactical analysis or strategic thinking. It was the choice of a warrior who had spent his entire life conquering others and could not comprehend the possibility of defeat. Even as his remaining ships were systematically captured around him, even as human soldiers cut through his defenses like they were made of paper, he ordered his flagship to maintain course toward Earth. All remaining vessels, converge on my position, he commanded through the fleet communication network. We will make a final assault on the human homeworld. If we are to die today, we die as warriors of the Empire. His remaining officers responded with the disciplined acknowledgement he expected, though he could hear the uncertainty in their voices. The Crimson Talon and its 5 surviving escorts formed up for what would either be a glorious final charge or a meaningless gesture of defiance. But as his ships accelerated toward Earth, something unprecedented happened. Instead of attempting to stop him, the human forces seemed to be actively clearing a path for his approach. Sir, Vex and I reported with obvious confusion. The human orbital platforms are ceasing fire and moving to flanking positions. They appear to be allowing us to approach their planet. Kethvar studied the tactical display with growing unease. The humans had demonstrated overwhelming superiority in both technology and tactics. They could have destroyed his remaining ships at any point in the last several hours. Why were they permitting him to threaten their homeworld? His answer came in the form of yet another transmission from the planet's surface, this one carrying the voice of the human military commander who had spoken earlier. Admiral Kethvar, this is General Harrison. We are monitoring your approach vector and have noted your intention to assault our planet directly. We want to be very clear about what you are about to encounter. The Admiral listened with growing dread, knowing that whatever the humans were about to reveal would be worse than anything he had yet experienced. You are approaching a world that has spent 50 years preparing for invasion by technologically superior forces. Every major population center, every industrial facility, and every strategic target that you might consider attacking has been fortified according to protocols designed by people who understood exactly what kind of weapons you would bring. More importantly, the general continued, you are approaching a world defended by 8 billion humans who have just watched you attack their homes and kill their families. You are not flying toward a planet of civilians hoping for mercy. You are flying toward a planet of very angry primates who have had time to prepare. Kethvar's scaled hide prickled with unease. The human's tone suggested that the planet-based defenses would be even more formidable than the space-based systems that had already devastated his fleet. Furthermore, General Harrison added, we want you to understand that your approach is being monitored by observers throughout the galaxy. We have been broadcasting detailed records of this entire engagement to every intelligent species within 50 light years. They are all watching to see what happens when someone attacks humanity. The implications of this struck Kethvar like a physical blow. The humans have been documenting his defeat and sharing it with other species. If his humiliation became known throughout the galactic community, the consequences for the Zephyrian Empire would extend far beyond the loss of a single fleet. But, most importantly, the general's voice took on a tone that made Kethvar's warrior instinct scream warnings. We want you to understand that what you have experienced so far was us holding back. The forces that destroyed your fleet were our defensive systems, designed to minimize casualties and capture rather than kill. What you're about to encounter are our offensive systems, designed for a very different purpose. As if to emphasize the point, Kethvar's sensors began detecting new energy signatures from the planet's surface. Massive installations were powering up across every continent, revealing defensive systems that dwarfed anything he had yet encountered. But these are not the surgical, precise weapons that had captured his ships. These were weapons designed for total destruction. Sir, Vex and I's voice was tight with fear. Preliminary scans are detecting at least 3,000 major weapons installations across the planet's surface. Energy output readings are, Sir, each installation appears to be more powerful than our flagship's main battery. 3,000 installations? Kethvar's tactical mind struggled to process the implications. Even if each weapon could only fire once, they could obliterate his remaining ships hundreds of times over. But the humans had demonstrated that their technology was far more advanced than his initial estimates. These weapons could probably sustain continuous fire for extended periods. Admiral, Draxmol called out urgently. We are receiving a priority transmission from the Empire. Fleet Command is demanding an immediate status report. Kethvar hesitated. How could he possibly explain what had happened? How could he tell his superiors that a supposedly primitive species had not only defeated his fleet, but was now threatening to take the war to the Empire itself? Put them through, he finally ordered. The view screen activated to show the familiar reptilian features of Fleet Admiral Esikatar, Kethvar's immediate superior and one of the most feared military commanders in the Empire. His expression was already grim, suggesting that disturbing reports had already reached the high command. Admiral Kethvar, Esikatar's voice carried the authority of absolute power. We have been monitoring unusual energy signatures from your operational sector. What is your status? Kethvar found himself unable to meet his superior's gaze. Sir, the conquest of Earth has encountered complications. Complications? Esikatar's eyes narrowed dangerously. Explain. The humans were not as primitive as intelligence reported. They have demonstrated technological capabilities that exceed our own in several key areas. My fleet has sustained significant casualties. There was a long pause as Esikatar processed this information. Are you telling me that a pre-spaceflight species has defeated the 9th Conquest Fleet? Before Kethvar could formulate a response, the human general's voice cut into the communication channel, somehow overriding their encrypted military frequency. Fleet Admiral Esikatar, the human said, using the superior officer's name and rank with casual familiarity. This is General Harrison of the United Earth Defense Command. I believe we need to have a conversation. Esikatar's expression shifted to one of pure shock. How are you accessing this communication? This is an encrypted military channel. Your admiral's ships provided us with your communication protocols when we captured them. General Harrison replied matter-of-factly. But, more importantly, we have been monitoring your Empire's military communications for the past 6 hours. We know about your border defenses, your fleet dispositions, and your strategic planning. Kethvar watched with growing horror as his superior's scaled features turned pale with realization. Furthermore, the human general continued, we have used your admiral's navigational databases to identify the locations of your major military installations. Our automated reconnaissance systems are already en route to 47 Zephyrian worlds, including your homeworld. Impossible, Sektar snarled. You lack the technology for interstellar travel. We lacked the technology until about 6 hours ago, General Harrison corrected. Your admiral was kind enough to provide us with detailed specifications for faster-than-light drive systems when we captured his ships. Our engineers have been remarkably quick in adapting these systems to our own designs. Kethvar realized with dawning horror that the humans had not just defeated his fleet. They had used his own technology to leapfrog centuries of development and achieve interstellar capabilities in a matter of hours. They were now preparing to take the war directly to the heart of the Zephyrian Empire using weapons and ships built from his own captured vessels. Admiral Esikatar, General Harrison continued, we are prepared to offer terms that will prevent this conflict from escalating further. The Zephyrian Empire will immediately cease all aggressive actions against inhabited worlds. All conquered species will be granted immediate independence. Your military forces will be reduced to levels sufficient only for local defense. In return, the human general added, "We will not implement the complete destruction of your civilization. Your people will be permitted to continue existing, though under the supervision of an interstellar peacekeeping force that we are currently organizing with several other species in this galactic region." SEK-Tar's response was everything Kethvar expected from a lifelong warrior of the Empire. The Zephyrian Empire does not negotiate with inferior species. We do not accept terms from primitives who should be serving as our slaves. "Very well," General Harrison replied, and there was something in his tone that made both Zephyrian commanders feel a chill of absolute dread. "Then, you have chosen the alternative." The communication channel shifted, and suddenly, both Zephyrian officers found themselves looking at multiple displays showing various locations throughout their territory. Kethvar recognized several major fleet bases, industrial worlds, and even the outer defenses of the Zephyrian homeworld itself. These images are being transmitted in real time from reconnaissance platforms that arrived at your locations approximately 20 minutes ago, General Harrison explained. "As you can see, our replication technology has allowed us to deploy forces throughout your territory faster than your own communication systems can carry warnings." The displays showed sleek, obviously human-designed vessels taking positions around Zephyrian installations. The ships were clearly built using captured Zephyrian technology, but they had been modified with human improvements that made them far more advanced than the originals. "Admiral SEK-Tar," the human general continued, "you have exactly 1 standard hour to contact every Zephyrian commander in your empire and order a complete cessation of hostile activities. If any Zephyrian vessel fires on our forces, if any conquered world reports continued oppression, or if any attempt is made to attack human vessels or installations, we will implement what our strategists call the final solution." The final solution involves the systematic destruction of every Zephyrian military asset in the galaxy, followed by the complete dismantlement of your industrial base. Your species will survive, but your civilization will be reduced to a pre-spaceflight level and monitored to ensure you never again pose a threat to other intelligent life. Kethvar watched his superior's expression cycle through disbelief, rage, and, finally, reluctant understanding. The humans were not bluffing. They possessed both the capability and the determination to carry out their threats. "You have 58 minutes remaining," General Harrison concluded. "Choose wisely." The communication ended, leaving both Zephyrian officers staring at displays showing human forces positioned throughout their empire. In less than 12 hours, a species they had intended to enslave had not only defeated them completely, but had somehow achieved the capability to threaten their entire civilization. "Admiral Kethvar," SEK-Tar's voice was hollow with defeat. "What have you done?" Kethvar found himself unable to answer. He had thought he was conducting a routine conquest of a primitive world. Instead, he had awakened a sleeping giant that was now threatening to reshape the entire galactic balance of power. As his flagship continued its futile approach toward Earth, surrounded by human forces that could destroy him at any moment, Admiral Kethvar finally understood what Commander Chen had meant when she said he would discover a terror beyond imagination. That terror was not humanity's technology, their tactics, or their weapons. The true terror was their absolute refusal to accept defeat, combined with their ability to turn any setback into an opportunity for advancement. They did not just fight back against threats. They eliminated them so completely that the threat could never arise again. And now, thanks to his catastrophic miscalculation, the entire Zephyrian Empire was about to learn why every species in the galaxy should fear the wrath of an angry human. The end came not with the glorious battle Admiral Kethvar had imagined, but with a simple choice that broke his warrior's heart: surrender or watch his empire burn. Fleet Admiral Tar's capitulation arrived with only minutes to spare before the human deadline expired. The communication was brief, bitter, and carried the weight of a civilization's defeat. All Zephyrian forces, this is Fleet Command. Cease hostile operations immediately. Implement full surrender protocols. The war is over. Kethvar stood on his bridge, watching the planet Earth grow larger in his view screen, and felt something die inside him. Not fear, not anger, but the fundamental worldview that had shaped his entire existence. For 43 years, he had believed in the superiority of the Zephyrian Empire, in the righteousness of conquest, in the natural order that placed the strong above the weak. In 12 hours, a species he had planned to enslave had demonstrated that everything he believed was wrong. "Sir," Vexenai's voice was barely above a whisper, "we are receiving docking instructions from the Human Orbital Command. They are treating us as prisoners of war rather than enemies to be destroyed." Even in defeat, the humans continued to confound him. By all rights, they should have obliterated his remaining ships in a display of righteous vengeance. Instead, they were extending protections and considerations that the Zephyrian Empire had never shown to defeated enemies. "Admiral," Communications Officer Draxmol interrupted his thoughts. "The humans are requesting that you personally report to their planetary surface for debriefing. They have guaranteed your safety and promised that you will be returned to your people once the transition process is complete." The transition process, as if the complete dismantlement of the most powerful empire in the known galaxy was merely an administrative procedure to be managed with paperwork and protocols. Kethvar found himself laughing bitterly at the cosmic irony of it all. He had come to conquer Earth with the largest fleet ever assembled for a single world subjugation. Now he was being invited to visit the surface as a diplomatic guest, while human forces occupied every major installation his empire had built over 3 centuries of expansion. "Prepare a shuttle," he ordered finally. "If I am to witness the end of my civilization, I might as well see it firsthand." The journey to Earth's surface took place under escort by human fighter craft that moved with impossible grace and speed. Kethvar found himself studying their design, noting how they incorporated elements of captured Zephyrian technology while improving upon it in ways that suggested a level of engineering sophistication his people had never achieved. The landing facility was unlike anything he had expected. Rather than a military installation designed to intimidate prisoners, it appeared to be a diplomatic complex built for genuine diplomatic contact. Gardens surrounded the landing pad, and the building showed architectural influences from dozens of different species, including several that he recognized from his own conquests. As his shuttle settled to the ground, Kethvar saw something that stopped his breath. Representatives from species he had personally enslaved, standing alongside human officials in what was clearly a position of equality and respect. The methane worlders, the crystalline hegemony, the singing forests of Nethari 9, all of them free and apparently working in cooperation with Earth's government. A human delegation approached his shuttle, led by a female in what appeared to be formal military dress. As he disembarked, she stepped forward with the bearing of a professional soldier, but without the triumphant arrogance he would have expected from a victorious enemy. "Admiral Kethvar," she said, speaking his language with fluent precision, "I am General Harrison. Welcome to Earth." He found himself studying her with professional curiosity. She was smaller than he had expected, lacking the physical intimidation factor that Zephyrian commanders cultivated. But there was something in her eyes an intelligence and determination that reminded him uncomfortably of the tactical brilliance that had destroyed his fleet. "General Harrison," he replied formally, "I am your prisoner." "No," she corrected him gently. "You are our guest. The war is over, Admiral. What happens now depends on choices that your people make going forward." She led him through the complex, past meeting rooms where he could see Zephyrian officers engaged in discussions with human officials and representatives from formerly conquered worlds. The atmosphere was businesslike rather than vindictive, focused on practical matters of transition rather than punishment or revenge. "I don't understand," Kethvar admitted as they walked. "Your forces have achieved complete victory. Why are you not demanding tribute, slaves, or territorial concessions? Why are you treating defeated enemies with such consideration?" General Harrison paused at an observation window overlooking a vast construction facility. Below them, humans and representatives from dozens of species were working together on projects that seemed to involve the construction of massive ships and installations. "Admiral," she said quietly, "let me ask you a question. In your 17 previous conquests, what happened to the defeated species after you claimed victory?" Kethvar felt his scales flush with uncomfortable heat. They became subjects of the Empire. Their resources were allocated according to imperial needs. Their populations were relocated as necessary for optimal efficiency. And how many of those subject species ever became truly loyal to the Empire? How many genuinely supported Zephyrian rule rather than simply enduring it? The question struck him like a physical blow because he knew the answer: none. Every conquered world required permanent garrison forces to prevent rebellion. Every subject species harbored resentment that periodically erupted into violence. The Empire's strength had always been built on fear and force rather than genuine cooperation. "Humans," General Harrison continued, "have learned something from our own history that apparently your species never discovered. Sustainable peace requires willing cooperation, not enforced submission. We could conquer your empire and rule it through fear, but that would simply create the same problems you've been dealing with for centuries." She gestured toward the construction facility below. "Instead, we are offering something that has never existed in this galaxy. A genuine confederation of equals, working together for mutual benefit rather than competing for dominance." "But surely," Kethvar protested, "your people demand some form of compensation for the attack on your world? Some punishment for those who destroyed your cities and killed your citizens?" General Harrison's expression grew grave. "Admiral, your attack on Earth killed approximately 50,000 civilians and destroyed infrastructure that will take years to rebuild. Those losses are not trivial, and they will not be forgotten. However," she continued, "our analysis indicates that your empire's conquest and oppression of other species over the past 3 centuries has resulted in the deaths of approximately 40 billion intelligent beings. The scale of suffering caused by Zephyrian expansion makes our own losses seem relatively minor in comparison." The numbers hit him like plasma fire. 40 billion deaths? He had never considered the cumulative cost of empire in such terms. Individual conquests had seemed manageable, necessary, even righteous when viewed from the perspective of Zephyrian superiority. But when the true scale was presented so starkly, he began to understand why the humans viewed his empire as a problem that required a permanent solution. "The question," General Harrison added, "is whether your people can learn to coexist peacefully with others, or whether they will continue to view conquest as a legitimate means of expansion." She led him to a conference room where several familiar faces waited. His own surviving officers, along with representatives from species throughout the former Zephyrian Empire. At the head of the table sat a human he recognized from earlier transmissions, President Shun. Admiral Kethvar, President Shun said as he entered. Please have a seat. We have much to discuss. The next several hours were unlike anything in Kethvar's experience. Instead of demanding unconditional surrender or imposing harsh terms of defeat, the humans presented what they called a reconstruction proposal designed to transform the Zephyrian Empire into something entirely different. The plan was comprehensive and, Kethvar had to admit, surprisingly generous. Zephyrian military forces would be reduced and reorganized into a purely defensive structure. Conquered worlds would be granted immediate independence, with economic and technical support provided during the transition period. Most remarkably, the Zephyrian homeworld would retain its sovereignty, though under the oversight of an interstellar peacekeeping organization that would monitor compliance with the new agreements. But why? Kethvar finally asked, after hours of reviewing proposals that seemed almost too good to be true. Why offer such terms to a defeated enemy? Why not simply destroy us and take our territory for yourselves? President Shun smiled sadly. Admiral, humans have a saying, an eye for an eye makes the whole world blind. We learned through bitter experience that cycles of revenge and conquest lead only to endless warfare and suffering. More importantly, she continued, we believe that every intelligent species has the potential to contribute something valuable to the galaxy. Your people have advanced skills in engineering, metallurgy, and space construction. Rather than destroying that knowledge through conquest, we would prefer to see it used for peaceful purposes that benefit everyone. She gestured toward a display showing the reconstruction projects already beginning throughout former Zephyrian space. Imagine what could be accomplished if all of these species worked together voluntarily, sharing knowledge and resources for mutual benefit rather than competing for dominance. As the discussions continued, Kethvar found himself confronting a fundamental truth that challenged everything he had believed about strength, power, and survival. The humans had demonstrated that true strength came not from the ability to conquer others, but from the wisdom to build something better than conquest. They had faced a technologically superior invader and had not just defeated them, but had transformed that victory into an opportunity to reshape the entire galactic civilization along more peaceful lines. They had taken his empire's own weapons and technology and used them to create something unprecedented, a genuine confederation based on cooperation rather than domination. 6 months later, Admiral Kethvar stood once again on the bridge of Starship, but not as a conqueror. His new vessel was a hybrid design, incorporating the best elements of both Zephyrian and human engineering, and it carried a crew drawn from 17 different species working together as equals. His mission was also different. Instead of conquest, he was leading a joint expedition to make first contact with a newly discovered intelligent species at the edge of known space. The goal was not to conquer or enslave, but to invite them to join the growing confederation that had emerged from the ashes of his former empire. As his ship approached the unknown world, Kethvar found himself thinking about the lessons he had learned from his defeat at human hands. He had discovered that there were forms of strength far more powerful than military force, ways of achieving security that did not require the subjugation of others. Most importantly, he had learned that the greatest terror in the galaxy was not humanity's weapons or their technology. It was their absolute refusal to accept that warfare and conquest were inevitable parts of intelligent existence. When faced with a hostile universe, they had chosen to make it less hostile rather than to become more hostile themselves. It was a lesson that had cost him an empire, but had given him something far more valuable: the chance to be part of building something better than any empire that had ever existed. And as his ship entered orbit around the New World, preparing for humanity's latest experiment in peaceful contact, Kethvar finally understood why every species in the galaxy had learned to respect rather than fear the humans of Earth. They were not the strongest or the most advanced species in the galaxy, but they were the only species that consistently chose cooperation over conquest, hope over fear, and peace over war. And that choice, more than any weapon or technology, was what made them truly unstoppable